The next panel we have is we have John Schlafly, who you all know, and John, of course, is Lois's son, her devoted son. John graduated with honors from Miami School of Law and earned a postgraduate degree in tax law from Washington University in St. Louis. He had previously received a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering. This guy's pretty smart. John's going to be joining my twin brother, Joe. Some of you may have noticed that. Joe is, he's based in Hong Kong, so he came all the way over here to be with us this weekend. Joe's, he works in auditing. He runs the division of East Asia. He travels from New Zealand, Australia, Singapore, Taiwan, China. He's based in Hong Kong. He goes up to Japan. He goes to Korea. He sits in the CEO meetings. He attends a lot of meetings around the world. And so he's very influential in his business. Joe's really good with numbers. And I can tell you during the election, and I'll be very brief, but during the election, Joe helped me at the Gateway Pundit. Joe was able to figure out, he calls me one day at the end of March. He says, Jim, I figured out the day Ted Cruz is going to be eliminated. I said, what? He goes, yeah, I figured it out. Because of the primaries on the East Coast, Joe figured out Trump's going to win these. He's going to have this many electoral votes, or what, the votes. I'm forgetting the word exactly, but that's, you know what I mean. Delegates. And he said, and it's going to be April 21st. So we put the post up 3 weeks early. Joe was so accurate that on April 21st, Ted Cruz stepped down. The Drudge Report, the very influential Drudge Report, probably the most influential publication in the United States, it had it up a couple days early. He said Ted Cruz is going to be eliminated in 2 days. So this was a headline, and then when Ted Cruz stepped down, the headline was Eliminate Ted. These were Joe's stories. Joe figured this out. Joe's a whiz with numbers. So he nailed it, and he not only nailed it, but he got the delegate count like off by 2 out of hundreds and hundreds. So we had a phenomenal time. Joe and I have raised so much hell in our lives. I can't tell you. I need to say this, though. Joe and I went through a very troubled time when we were young. And Joe, it's amazing because I think we were voted in college most likely to have a cigarette in our mouths, most likely to be late for class, and most likely to be dead at 30. We were we were very lost, but you know what? We had a mother who prayed. We had a mother who we would see on her knees praying for her sons, and I tell you, Joe and I had a turnaround in our early 20s, and so Joe, I'm going to just tell you this right now. Joe, at his bottom, when we were really hitting bottom, and we both hit it real hard and real quick in our early life, Joe was arrested for beating up a cop, okay? So we are looking at a miracle. God works miracles today. And Joe, instead of being in prison today or dead or a drunk on the street, Joe is attending meetings in Singapore with the top executives of one of the top insurance companies in the world. God is good, and there is redemption. So I wanted to tell that story. I'm thrilled to hear these guys. They're going to talk today about the Mueller investigation. Joe has broken several stories that have been up again on the Drudge Report in the past several months, looking at this very controversial witch hunt against our dear president, and it needs to stop. So Joe and John.
Well, there's so many bad things to say about the Mueller investigation that it takes 2 of us. Most of you remember about 20 years ago when Rush Limbaugh was starting out and building his national audience, that people were amazed that somebody could talk for 3 hours a day and talk so intelligently. And then after a while, and he came to Eagle Counsel 20 years ago, and so did his mother, by the way, who's the real secret. But then we learned that Rush, who dropped out of college in his first year and kicked around aimlessly for a while, had a smart brother, David Limbaugh, who some of you know, who's a lawyer and who perhaps fed rushed some of his good material and wrote some best-selling books. Well, now we've learned that the Gateway Pundit likewise has a smart brother who's contributed some of the best things on the site. Well, that's a secret that we've all learned here this morning, I guess. Well, just to set the stage, if you all pull out your pocket Constitution and turn to Article 2, and it begins, the executive power shall be vested in a President of the United States. It's as simple as that. The President has the executive power. No one else. Not even the Vice President has executive power. And it goes on from there to say that the President, with the advice and consent of the Senate, shall appoint the principal officers and heads of departments of the executive branch, but inferior officers who are designated by Congress may be filled in other ways, such as by the heads of departments, or in other ways that Congress shall apply. Well, all right, so the President appointed the Attorney General and the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, with Senate confirmation. But the special counsel who was appointed by Rosenstein did not receive Senate confirmation. So there's a question right there, whether his appointment was even valid. And then there's a question, well, if they can be appointed, how can they be removed, or can they be removed? Now, our country went through a crisis 150 years ago when President Andrew Johnson, president, who had the power to appoint principal officers who were confirmed by the Senate, removed one, and the Senate said, no, you can't do that. And they attempted to impeach the president for removing an officer against the will of the Senate. And we went through a tremendous crisis about that. Eventually, the general belief, although the Supreme Court didn't rule on that, the belief that it's unconstitutional, almost everyone believes, to limit the power of the president to remove officers, because that violates his executive power. Then in the 1980s, we had what was called the Independent Counsel, which was set up by Congress. The Independent Counsel, and we had a number of independent counsels, the final one being Kenneth Starr, who was appointed not by the president, but by a court. So that too violated the executive power. Justice Scalia believed that was totally unconstitutional. There was a tremendous debate about that. Kenneth Starr, once he was appointed, could go from issue to issue to issue ad infinitum. And he ended up investigating the matter that, he was investigating different scandals, and finally, when Linda Tripp showed him evidence that Bill Clinton had not told the truth under oath in a private lawsuit that wasn't part of his purview, he decided that he could investigate that too. And but Congress let that independent counsel expire. So now we have the special counsel, and there are questions about what its constitutionality and the appointment and what he is doing, because he has gone so far beyond the so-called collusion, which was what we were supposed to investigate. Now, I'm going to turn the podium over to my cohort here, Joe Hoft. I have a little bit more to say about what the special counsel did with campaign finance, if we have time, because he turned that over to a United States attorney who's investigating campaign finance. But that too is completely illegal in my opinion. And if there's a little time left, I want to address that. But Joe is going to speak now about all the different ways in which the investigation by Robert Mueller is either illegal or unconstitutional. Joe?
Thanks, John, and thanks, Jim, for the intro. And Yeah, he brought up some things from our past that were pretty embarrassing and shaming, but thank God we're here today, and we've all gone through things. And I've watched Jim with the Gateway Pundit, and I could just interject here before we jump into the topic, maybe segue into it in my own way. And I was actually going to talk about that Ted Cruz, that post too, with the Gateway Pundit and Drudge back in April of 2016. But I've watched Jim for years do this website. He told me it was a blog. I didn't know what a blog was. And I followed him, and I loved the stuff he was writing. He'd get so excited when some of these other big sites would link to him. And along the way, he got these little kisses all the way along the way, and it kept him going. And he proved, again, that the method and the way to reach success is it's simple. It's not easy maybe sometimes, but it's simple. And it's just a lot of hard work. So day after day after day, I saw Jim building this website, posting 10 to 20 sites or posts a day for years, every day by himself for 10 years. And I could go into that, but it's just amazing if you do the right thing day after day after day, how success will come. And it's easiest when you're doing something that you love. And that's what Jim did. He's doing something he loved, and he had some really wonderful people that came out of nowhere that supported him along the way. And many of them were here this weekend. And it's just amazing to see how this Eagle Forum, with its years of conservative and Christian values, and you mix that with the Gateway Pundit and the new wave media, and we have got a movement here. It's unbelievable. General Flynn is saying this is a movement. And it's been great listening to all these people. So what an incredible weekend, and I'm so honored to be here just to share this. And I tell you what, if there's anything I'd like to talk about, it'd be this Mueller investigation. Probably most of us. This is the most disgusting thing we've seen in perhaps U.S. history. Probably the most disgusting thing about it is how our media has covered it up. And that's what's just, if we had a real media that was halfway honest, this thing would have been over a long time ago. We'd probably have a lot of people in jail. And it's unbelievable. I talked to Tony Schaefer yesterday, and I just love that guy, and he came and spoke, and I was so thrilled to hear that he was going to be here. And he said he talked to some higher-up guy, the former FBI or DOJ guy recently, and they said it is frightening to see how a small group of people could perform a coup d'etat and almost get away with it. And that's what we've seen in this country over the last couple of years. It's just amazing. And going back to April of 2016, Jim and I really liked Donald Trump. There was a lot of things about this guy that were fascinating. He twisted I believed in free trade all those years, and he twisted it. And I remember reading an article at Breitbart, and I tell you, Jim and Breitbart were two of these leading websites that were pushing this conservative agenda, loving Trump, and so was Drudge Report. And I tell you what, the places you should go, I think, on a daily basis, it's not CNN or MSNBC. It's the Gateway Pundit, it's Breitbart, and it's the Drudge Report. And they fell in love. And the Conservative Treehouse. And they've done a great job, too. And anyways, so in early April, we really liked Trump. And I know he's got a huge ego. And a lot of people, we've all seen that. This guy's got an ego. But look at the success that he's had behind it. And the thing that hits me now, thank God that this guy has an ego. Because a man with a less ego, who would have gone through what this guy's gone through? It's been an injustice. And so we're going to talk about, really, there's so much that we could talk about. We could spend hours here, but we're just going to focus on a couple thoughts. One is Mueller himself. And how did Mueller fit into this thing? And does he fit in? Does it even make sense that he's part of this thing? Maybe it makes sense from the left, and it makes sense if you're corrupt, I think. And the other thing we want to talk about is just the thing itself and how, like John said, is this thing even legal? Is it constitutional? And so we'll jump right into it now. I guess as far as Mueller goes, and here's just a few bullets, but again, I talked to Tony Schaefer just the other day, and I asked him, what do you think of Mueller? And he said, well, you know what, in the early 2000s, there was an investigation related to 9/11. And Mueller came back and he said he withheld some information. And he said, I knew then that this was not a good man. And that was in the early 2000s. We were told when Mueller was assigned to this special counsel what a good man he was, what a man of integrity, and blah, blah, blah. And we heard that over and over from our media. He's a good man, he'll be fair, he'll be honest. And we put up a post, I see it's been more than a year ago now, I looked at it, and I'm going to talk about two posts, and this was one. And the first post was on Mueller. Who is this guy? And a couple arguments that we posted, that we laid out. One is, let's look at this guy's history. And I didn't even know about this stuff that Tony's talking about. Representative Gomer, Louis Gomer's got a multi-page document where he talks about Mueller. Take a look at this guy and the truth about this guy. This guy's been around, involved in a lot of things for a long period of time. And that's without talking about Tony Schaefer and all these people that are in the know. But here's just a list of some of the things. When Mueller was the FBI director, and I understand that he was maybe the second longest serving FBI director behind Hoover. And during that period of time, think about all the corruption that we saw in our government and how many of those cases ended up with anybody going to jail. And here's just an example of some. The IRS targeting incident where individuals that were in the Tea Party tried to get a special permit through the IRS, and they didn't get it. And then when they started talking to each other, they found out, man, we're all being targeted here. And that was Obama's White House. And who was the head of the FBI then? It was Robert Mueller. Same with all the Fast and Furious, Associated Press spying, Obama spying on people. Fast and Furious was a gun running. The people wouldn't. I'm not an expert on that, but there was people saying that the government was gun running down there, in an attempt to get a negative perception of guns. Obama didn't like guns. Clinton Foundation pay for play. That started under Mueller. Uranium One. And if you guys are familiar with that, that was the one story that came out in the New York Times over the last decade that was actually worth reading. And they came out, and it was with a guy from Breitbart who helped write this piece about how the Clintons got $146 million to their foundation at about the same time that they passed something through that allowed 20% of U.S. uranium to be sold, in essence, to the Russians. And then the Clinton private email server, that started when Mueller was in place. So, I mean, if you just look at this guy's track record alone, you start scratching your head. Well, this doesn't sound good. Who on any of these things was ever indicted? These, you know, we're not dumb. The average person can see this stuff and say, that's not right, that's a crime. And yet nothing ever happened with any of these incidents. That was one thing about Mueller that we raised more than a year ago. And I'm going to jump into another post and piece, and I'll mention the other two things that we mentioned here in numbers 4 and 5. But I wanted to bring up 10. We put together a post about 6-8 months ago, and it was the 10 reasons that the special counsel was unconstitutional. And Drudge grabbed that and he put it up on his site, and it was up for a day or so. And I was so happy. Every time that Drudge grabs something from Jim's site and links to it, and when it's talking about the corruption of the deep state and the Clintons and Obama, or when we're talking about how great President Trump is, I feel like, man, this is great. A guy in Hong Kong can do something and really praise this, this president and these great people. Last weekend, after Obama came out and spoke about how great he was and how he saved the economy, we put together a post the first 600 days, because that was last week, 600 days of Trump's presidency. And our post was, let's compare Obama's first 600 days to Trump's. And Drudge grabbed it and put it up for a day, and it was awesome. Because Trump set record after record in the economy, and Obama had, the media won't tell you this, when Obama was elected, the stock market tanked. It was already tanking. It hit rock bottom. It went down to 6,000. It dropped 30% after Obama was elected. Stock market's an indicator of perceptions and expectations of the future. When Donald Trump won, he set the market on like Trump said, that was a recovery, if you'd call it that. We're on a rocket ship, and that's what he did. Last year, nobody knows this, but was the greatest year in stock market history. In history, it gained more points, the Dow Jones, last year than any year in history, 4,600 points. And the most ever before that was like 34 or 500. He had 71 new all-time stock market highs last year, and nobody knows that. So it was really fun to point all this stuff out and then compare that to Obama's crappy economy. But anyways, so glad that Drudge sometimes grabs our stuff and puts it up there. This post was up there, and we talked about the 10 reasons why the Mueller investigation was unconstitutional. Greg Jarrett from Fox News has done a great job, and he's got a bestseller out on New York Times right now. And he said long ago that this thing's unconstitutional, and it was already mentioned. This special counsel law came into play in the early 2000s, And a couple things that it says is, one, it says you have to have a crime. There has to be a crime that needs to be investigated. And if you look at Mueller's original letter where he appointed Robert Mueller as the special counsel, there was no crime listed. It says we want you to look at, and I think this collusion with Russia. And as Jarrett pointed out months ago, a year ago, there's no such thing as that crime in our statutory code. That's not a crime. It's not even listed. And so the fact that they were basing this investigation on that, and you hear people now, there was a reported from that individual from National Review a week or two ago that's done some good work, but he said, where's the crime? Well, Greg Jarrett was pointing this out a long time ago. What is the crime? And we still don't know that. And I think Congress is now starting to ask for that. What is the crime that caused you to start this entire investigation? And that's a key point of the special counsel law. And Mueller had in one line to look at the Trump's Russia collusion. And then the second point that Jarrett made months ago is related to the scope of the special counsel. The new law says that, and after the Clintons, and I think most people agreed that, hey, we need to, if you're going to do an investigation, you have to have a limited scope. It has to be direct and focused on that area, that crime. And instead, in Rosenstein's two-sentence directive to set this thing up, the second sentence was, well, you need to look at this Russia collusion thing, but then you also can look at anything you want to. And that was basically the second sentence. And Greg Jarrett says that's not constitutional. That goes against the law as well. So this thing was originally set up on two sentences from Rosenstein, and now people are finally asking this question. Of course, our media never touched it. They said, yo, good for you. This is really good that we're doing this. No, that was all a lie. This whole thing's based on a lie. What I wanted to point out here, this is like our third and fourth points on this Mueller investigation being either unconstitutional or illegal. It relates to conflicts of interest. And so I've been involved in the finance and the auditing professions for a long time. Like Jim said, I've met with audit committees around the world. One very simple thing, and a lot of people don't know this if you're not in these professions, but in auditing, and even just in an internal auditor at a corporation, there's certain guidance that says that if you have any conflict of interest, you cannot be involved in that audit. If you even have the appearance of a conflict of interest, you cannot be involved in that audit. And I can give you an example. We had a girl that we hired in Australia, and then her husband joined the team in Australia, at our office in Australia. And they're both relatively low level. Her husband was in a really pretty well entry-level job, but we had to create and identify and define what we were going to do if we ever were going to be involved in something that he was involved in. And we put a document together, and that went all the way to our board of directors here at corporate. We want people to know that if ever she was going to be involved in an audit with him, she wouldn't be able to. We would find some other people to do it. And this is just low-level people at a corporation. This is according to the IPPA, the International Professional Practice Standards of Auditing, if you care about that. But that's just basic. That's just for an auditor. External auditors have more stringent guidelines. In the legal profession, it's even more stringent. And the fact that, first of all, that Mueller accepted this thing based on his conflicts is unbelievable. He and Comey are best friends. These guys, work together. They know each other. What was he ever doing, and why has our media never said, what is this guy doing in charge of this investigation? He is best friends with Comey, which kicked off this whole deal. And so anyways, that's a key point. The other key point, and you can go back and look at his background, that's the key point. The second key point is all the people he brought into his team. They're all as conflicted as he is. A couple of this, Peter Strzok, Lisa Page, you're hearing about their text messages, and Jeannie Ray is an attorney he brought on the team. She represented the Clinton Foundation. Weissman, who's on our team, was at Hillary's funeral, as Rudy Giuliani called it. The night of the election, he called it her funeral. But that's the team that Mueller brought in. There's an individual online, his name's Robert Barnes, and he's just brilliant. And he's brought up about five or so reasons why this thing is unconstitutional. But I'm going to go through these real quick due to time. But one is Rosenstein's acting as Rosenstein's scope exceeds Sessions' recusal. As you know, Jeff Sessions recused himself, but he recused himself from anything related to the 2016 election related to Russia. This thing, when Mueller started going outside of that scope, that was Jeff Sessions, and he has a duty to stand up and say, no, this is mine, this is not yours. And he hasn't done it. Another point, this Barnes brought up 5 points, and they were all in this post that hit the Drudge Report. Special counsel cannot be a substitute AG. That's not in our law. I'll go through these quickly. Rosenstein said that, or Barnes said, Rosenstein cannot monopolize supervision of Mueller's actions. Because in his second article that came out where he further defined the Mueller investigation, he said, any of this stuff you need to come to me on. And that's not legit either. If this stuff is not related to Russia in 2016 and the Trump campaign, then that needs to go to Jeff Sessions too. And Jeff Sessions, again, is sleeping at the wheel and not doing anything about it. Yep. And Rosenstein doesn't have the authority over tax crimes. And if there's a tax issue in the FBI, that goes through a separate group. Rosenstein doesn't have the authority to look at all that stuff on Manafort, et cetera. That's not his jurisdiction. And number 9 here, Rosenstein created this special inquisitor too. This is the way Barnes put it. And again, just a 5th point from Barnes. And then finally here, the special counsel, basically it was not necessary. If you read the law, it says you set up a special counsel when there's a matter that requires a special counsel. And it could easily be argued that this thing never should have gone to a special counsel. And so there's other things to talk about here, and I'll turn it over to John to wrap this up. But we just, we believe from just the basic fundamentals, this thing is not constitutional. It should not be in place. It's an outrage, and we got to continue to pray that this thing gets wrapped up as soon as possible, and then we can start bringing those guys and put them through the same hell that they put a lot of other people through. Thank you.
Well, I would just conclude by responding to what we hear all the time by the people who say the president is not above the law. Well, that's true. The president isn't above the law. He took an oath to support and defend our Constitution. But the president is above the Justice Department. That is what the Constitution says. All the heads of that department and the inferior officers in that department are subject to appointment and removal by the president. And if the Congress and the American people think that appointments and removals of officers are in some way corrupt, the remedy for that is through impeachment, not through prosecution. And so I do expect that as soon as we're past the November election, that there will be some changes made in the Department of Justice, and they're long overdue. I don't know exactly what route they're going to take, but that is what the President has the power to do and what I expect him to do. So thank you all for addressing this very important subject.